Yeah, there we go. Now you're Omari Taylor, and I'm Alisa Starr. And this is Alisa Starr Show with Omari Taylor, and we are going to talk about some political shit. Omari, I live in Capitol Hill, Seattle, and you live in...
West Seattle, the Apple District.
One of our main bridges connecting my neighborhood and your neighborhood, the West Seattle Bridge, did it actually collapse?
It's closed off, and there's cracks in it.
Okay. All right.
The upper bridge and now the lower bridge both have cracks. The lower bridge, to my understanding, is still in use, but it's going to be closed soon.
Well, and it's limited use, right? Like they're like 5 people can go across at a time. Probably.
Something like that.
Like transportation costs of goods are going to go up, I think.
Yeah, access to the rest of the country, or excuse me, the rest of the city is severely limited. Difficult commute for a lot of people.
Yeah. And so West Seattle's been separated by this bridge closure, and you know the big problem with the bridge closure is that it could have been avoided if we just fixed the bridge, right?
Right. That bridge is apparently they're just now starting to state that it actually had a lot of problems before.
Before it had cracks in it? It had other problems before that?
It's the same. No, they're saying that it had cracks in it. The cracks were there before, and this is the first time they actually did something about it. It's not like the cracks are suddenly showed up. They're just getting around to saying that, oh, well, these cracks have actually been here for a while, and we could have fixed it, but didn't. They kind of just let that slide.
I don't understand that. I remember when Obama said there are all these bridges that we have to work on, you know,
right?
And nobody, and like there were, you know, Jon Stewart made some jokes about it, but I was like, okay, so you have a list of bridges that you know are falling apart that we're just not going to create jobs around fixing them? That's just not... Then we're going to go back to arguing whether or not everybody deserves medical care? Like, that's... What? Is how I feel about that.
I believe it to be a further erosion of the infrastructure. And to me, it's really self-defeating. I mean, without bridges, commerce can't really take place. And commerce is sort of what drives the country.
Isn't that supposed to be our only our only set of values? Is making money off stuff?
Yeah, it just seems like it seems counterintuitive. Like you would think that people would invest in that and make sure that the bridges are running, the bridges are sturdy.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
they're like the case at all.
We all have to go across fucking bridges. Right? It's not like the bridges are just for a certain group of people we don't give a shit about. But it's sort of endemic in the falling apart of America, and the I think it's kind of we're starting to see the end result of capitalism, which is that there's no, you know, like you see all these different monopolies making excuses for their behavior and being like, oh, we'll go fix it later. Right? And I sort of feel like in America, there is no later. The goal of capitalism is just to consume everything and to hoard wealth and special hotspots. But to consume all the resources and to turn them into wealth for the few. There is no end goal of, and then Jeff Bezos pays everybody a living wage and feeds the poor. That's not how that story ends.
And it just seems really, it just seems really evocative. It's funny that you mentioned Bezos. It seems really evocative that an indicting of capitalism as a whole, that he's the only one that's really floating above all of this. He's still collecting money. They just posted his profits. I don't know what the exact figures are. He's gotten a lot of profits, while everyone else, like lots of things, are being shut down. And I think that ties into the fact that people are still ordering off of Amazon as a way of coping with, you know, things not being back to normal. I think that speaks to the desperation of how people want things to be back to normal so much that they're actually buying things from his side. He's still cleaning up rather nicely.
Yeah, I did it. And he he cleans up without having, like, he gave his workers a temporary $2 an hour raise. No talk of living wages, right? No talk of, and before COVID, you know, I made a lot of jokes online about how Amazon packages feel great, except, you know, the only problem is that they smell like slave tears, right? Because before COVID, there were talks about how if you worked in an Amazon warehouse, you had a high suicide rate. Because if somebody caught you speaking to another person or going to the bathroom during your workday, then you could be fired at any time for that kind of shit. And so, I mean, like, essentially, you know, you were supposed to silently work in this warehouse as fast as you humanly could, holding in your pee, not drinking water, just not doing, like, human things. Like, Jeff Bezos was trying to get, like, robot work out of a human workforce. And that was the problem before COVID. Before we had to even more humanize people in our worlds. You know, like, before we were like, wait, okay, not only do they need bathroom breaks and water, but they also need to be able to stop and wash their hands in between packages, or, you know, like, because, you know, Bezos could solve poverty all on his own. He's just choosing not to.
Yeah, and I think that's really indicative of the billionaire mindset. And people are still deluding themselves, thinking that, you know, this man is looking out for them, and that this is something to emulate, and that they too can be billionaires or millionaires even. And it's just like, no, it's not set up.
Yeah.
You know, and I especially in times like these, I remember back in March, you know, when essential workers were still working at Amazon factories, and some people in New York, one person in particular organized a strike in Amazon because of how he was being totally ostracized. I don't know what became of him. He was a young black man, and they didn't treat him too well. And eventually, I read this in a memo surfaced about how they're going to handle this problem. And it was just inherently racist. They were going to use some racist. What I mean to say is they were going to assume some racist positions in order to make him look bad.
Whoa! You mean like the planned response from Amazon? P.S. I fucking love The Root. The Root is like where I get 90% of my news. But yeah, so you're saying that they plan to use racism in order to quell a working a labor uprising.
A racist tactic. They tried to use a racist tactic. They were trying to the details of it. I'll have to look at it again, but the details of it were in fact racist. The approach was racist in nature, and it was basically the idea was that they were going to discredit him and ruin his career because he was just a lowly worker, but he was organizing people to walk out of Amazon. And you're starting to see this now. I mean, when this first began, there was talk of rent strikes and boycotts and strikes in general, and walkouts, and people tried to quell that. The idea is that you're just supposed to get back to work. And I think that sort of segues into people being in the streets right now. I think what they want to do is quell that so that you wouldn't have what you have right now, which is people in the streets.
Yes.
I mean, to protest for 50 straight days in Portland, I think the message was, all right, we've had enough. Now we're sitting in the jackboots.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And when I was researching, you know, like I've been retweeting and I'm trying to connect the people who are on the ground in Portland with whatever following I've got, right? And so I'm trying to spread as much information as I can about what's actually taking place. And one of the articles I read, this guy said, you know, the deal is we're not getting help in Portland. A lot of us are unemployed. A lot of us know that we're going to be evicted in the next couple of months. You know, the food banks are empty and there's no help coming from the federal government. And all of that is setting in, and you have everyone realizing that at the same time and realizing we don't have anything to fucking lose. So we're literally fighting for our lives. You know, we're literally fighting to be seen by this government so that they will address our needs. And and he said that, you know, like, and something I noticed living near to CHOP is that people were protesting for a lot of different reasons. You know, they were protesting because they had time. They were protesting because when we had those few months off, there were studies that said that we became more neighborly, right? Because all of a sudden, you know, you're stuck with the people in your neighborhood as your main support system. You know, you can't go across town anymore. You can't go out into the world anymore. Your coworkers you only see on your computer. So your neighbors become real people to you. And I think that sense of knowing your neighbors and those couple months we had between the COVID and the protests were all about just the fact that people had connected to each other, you know, and so when you see somebody get beaten on TV and you're like, oh, that could be my neighbor. And now, you know, that person's been helping me figure out how to get food for the last 2 months. That person has been, you know, open with me about how much rent they pay, so we can figure out how fair or unfair, you know, our rental situation is, right? All of a sudden, all the walls came down, and all this, I think a lot of the stupid corporate rules, you know, you don't talk about your wages, you don't talk about your rent, you don't talk about money. Like, those rules were invented by people who were trying to make us fight over scraps. And a lot of that had to come down when we're dealing with the realities of COVID. Because all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, this is how much rent I have to pay. How do I get that without going to work? Right? All of a sudden it was just a math problem that everybody had to solve at the same time. So I think that, and I think for a lot of white allies, it was a relief to be able to show up like this. I know for me, you know, to be able to show up and fight. But in Seattle, the protest here started around the same time that Block Party would have started, right? And there, for like during the daytime, the CHOP felt like Block Party. And you know, if somebody lives outside of Seattle, in Capitol Hill, there's a major neighborhood-wide party once a month all summer long. There's Block Party, there's Pride, and then there's the music festival. I forget what it is. Or maybe I'm getting those mixed up in the order, but there's one a month.
Bumbershoot?
Bumbershoot's another one. But I feel like there's another thing too. Like it's a fucking party all summer. And a lot of people who work in Capitol Hill make their nut off of that summertime fun when everybody's like, woo, the sun's out. And it's crazy because when I lived in Ireland, people had the same reaction. Like, if the sun came out in Ireland, everyone just took the day off and went outside. And you just saw all these pale, bright red bodies, right? It was very blinding. And I sort of feel like Seattleites do the same thing. Is like we're just like, oh my God, there's so much sun, soak it up, you know? And so being in that area of Capitol Hill during that time felt like normalcy. You know, and the music and people hanging out on the field, you know, we were just doing it with extra signs is what it felt like during the day. You know, at night when the cops got tired, like I think you're saying is like 50 days of Portland protesters and the cops are just tired. They're just like, fuck it. All right, come in, terrorize them.
And I also think there's pressure on the businesses. You know, I hear tell of certain businesses in Seattle saying the violence has gotten too much, we're going to leave. And I think that same thing might have been happening in Portland. And I think there might have been pressure from people with money behind the scenes that leaned on, who perhaps had political contacts, or perhaps leaned on people who could effectively pull the strings to send in federal troops, and who had a direct byline to the White House. I mean, I don't think that's so far-fetched.
No, it's not.
And I think this might have been something they were planning all along, just to see, okay, sort of to gauge the level of people who effectively had nothing to lose, or who had real-life grievances against the system, and see exactly how far they were willing to go.
Yeah.
But you can only treat people so badly enough, long enough, and they're going to buck. And I think that's what was I think that's what happened with the chop. I just don't think it was. Frankly, I mean, my bit of criticism is I don't think it was wholly organized enough.
It wasn't organized at all. It wasn't organized at all. No. I completely agree with you. That's for reals. I think that the thing about CHOP that's interesting to me is that on a micro level, what happened here every day at CHOP is happening in Portland, kind of on a macro level. Like what you just said in a nutshell is that, like, because all day long people would stream past my house towards the protest. We'd all greet each other. Everybody was wearing masks, carrying signs, happy, like kind, sharing. You know, people were giving each other shit. You know, and keeping a respectful distance. You know, which I think for Seattleites also just feels really good. All of the social distancing is like, this is where I wanted to be all along. You know, so and I went to the daytime protest. The bands were popping. It was so nice to just like wander around and hear good music, and you know, it felt a lot like a music festival during the day. And when I was in the crowd, you know, I was there before the East Precinct left, and they had this imaginary line they invented that they were holding, and they did have the National Guard there. So the thing is, I think your theory is pretty close to right. The National Guard came down as soon as the protest started. So the guys who are going around kidnapping people right now, those federal troops, I think have been in these cities already. I think that they were sent here as soon as the protests started. Now that the protests have been going on for a while, I think that they're coordinating with local police and just trying to figure out what kind of scare tactics might work. But I have heard reports from newspapers that the police in almost all these cities through back channels are talking to the DHS and the Border Patrol. They are talking to the feds who have come in. The mayor may not like it. The mayor may disavow it. And the chief of police may disavow it. But somebody underneath them is coordinating efforts. And coordinating efforts enough that it's leaking to some press. So I think this is an extension. But the thing that I wanted to say is that every night at 11 o'clock and then at 1 o'clock, the cops would get tired and they'd want to go home. And so they'd start gassing everybody. That's how CHOP worked. It's during the day, all day long. It was a party, and the cops would stand there holding their line, right? And there'd be a big crowd of people like doing chants and handing out hand sanitizers. Like there's girls going through the crowd on roller skates offering people oranges, you know, and there's free food. And all of this, I think, was appealing to like this demographic. Like I call them like the rail car kids. Like they're, you know, those the train hoppers. You know what I'm talking about? The
train hoppers. I mean, I've worked with some of them. The train hoppers, the folks who don't really want to invest in the system, who totally disavow participating in all the system.
Like those are hardcore anarchists. You know what I'm talking? Oh my God! Yes, right. Yes. As a social worker, what was your experience with train hoppers and people like that?
You know, some just didn't really. Some don't really adhere to the notion of doing anything conventional, up to and including bathing or doing laundry. So it makes it almost impossible to do things like, okay, well, those sorts of things sort of prevent you from, those put up barriers to you getting any kind of housing, let alone employment. Well, I don't want to get employment. It's the response. And it's just like, okay, well, how do you expect to live? Or I'll figure something out. And it just seems like there's a real disconnect about how stuff works. I mean,
like the anarchists that I've known that were like train hoppers, they squatted, you know, they never paid rent. Rent is a scam, right? Or they were the kinds of people who knew where like big squat warehouses were around each town that they went to,
right?
You know, and And like they would go out begging during the day, and then at night they would pool all their resources, especially in Portland. I knew a lot of train hopper kids who like to do that. They'd pool all their resources at night. You know, they'd drive pedicabs, or they'd beg, or they'd busk, or whatever. And then they'd split it up for food. You know, they try to find open gardens around town and steal produce that way. But they were really proud of not investing in any kind of any kind of capitalism. That's what anarchists, like, that's the anarchists that I've known, the crusty punks like you're talking about, who are like, bathing, unnecessary. That's just a scam, right? Those guys are like, yeah, well, I don't have to because I can dumpster dive for food. I can busk if I, for transportation. I can hitchhike. There's always a train going somewhere that I can figure out how to hop on. And, and they also think of like the United States as their home, not even a particular city. They're like, they blow into some town, they have a good time, they tour their spots, and then they get on a train and they try and hang out in another town. But they're really proud of the fact that they don't want the job, because then the man knows where you are, they take your taxes, and they're participating in this capitalist like system that they think is the root of all evil.
Right.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, like that. And I think because of this, some undoubtedly are angry, perhaps with their parents. And in fact, this probably sounds dismissive of those types, but a lot of times I see it as nothing more than the protectorate rebellion against Tommy and Patty.
A lot of almost overwhelmingly crusty punks like that are white. And sometimes, more often than not, they come from security. They come from some kind of secured income. And they're choosing not to have any security as an adult, which, I don't know how dismissive that is when you as a social worker get to see a lot of people who don't come from security and can't turn their nose up at it.
Right. And I think also there's perhaps there's some justice in the grievances they feel. In fact, I can pretty much attest to there being there's some justice in that, but at the same time, the complete extreme that one goes to of not participating at all, I guess I can't really get behind that. Each individual has to decide how he or she's going to resist or rebel or whatever. But I think there's smarter ways of going about it other than resorting to extremes. And I guess you could get away with that stuff too when you're younger. But as you start to get older, when I see older people living like that, it's just I see how it takes its toll on the body and brain. And it's a very hard life. And it seems unnecessarily hard from where I'm sitting.
Rejecting capitalism will fuck your body up, because you gotta work a lot as hard at not being in a society as you do at being in a society.
Right.
It's just a different kind of work. I think that's true too. Those crusty punks, the thing that I really liked, I met some when I was in England. I was in the tip, Brighton, right? And I was on the beach. I was 20, and I was like sitting there on the beach smoking a cigarette, trying to figure out why the fuck there wasn't any sand, right? It's just rocks there, like big rocks. It's really uncomfortable, right? And I was just really pissed off because I just wanted to see the beach, and it was so fucking uncomfortable. And I saw these two crusty punks down the beach who were eyeing me, and they were drinking two 2-liter Safeway bottles of beer. And I was like, oh my God, Safeway makes 2-liter bottles of beer here? Like, that's crazy, right? And one of them comes up to me and he's like, I'm Bim. This is Psycho. Would you like some acid? So, of course, I said yes, right? Anyway, I followed them to their squat. They let me stay. I cleaned it for them. Like, I don't know. I think I was playing Snow White a little bit. And they ended up telling me all these stories. Like, they supplied all the acid to that town, all the acid, and the only weed I ever saw in England. And they told me all these stories about how these were the guys that whenever there was a new byway, I don't know, whatever they call them in England, that was being proposed, these are the guys who would live in the trees so that nobody could knock those trees over for months. And and as they would hold out as long as they could, right? Because these crusty punks don't give a shit. They'll shit in a tree, you know, as long as somebody's supplying them with beer, and that was apparently always on tap for the crusty punks, right? They were like, sure, we'll protest like this. We'll hold this space, you know, for these trees, because we don't give a fuck. This is comfortable enough for us. And so knowing those guys over there, and then the same kind of crusty punks in Portland and San Jose, at CHOP, when the people who became CHOP were obviously the crusty punks, but they were also the people who stayed all night, because the smoke bombs would start at 11, right? That's when the police would be like, all right, we're tired, we want to go home. And they'd start tear gassing the neighborhood, and they'd start shooting at the protesters. Protesters didn't start shit, at least not every night at 11, you know?
No, that's the cops. They have the state power, and they have the dedication to do that.
And they would do it again at 1 for whoever stuck around, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I could hear the screams, I could smell the gas from here every night, you know, and I was on Twitter the whole time trying to figure out if what I was hearing, like if I could see it, if it was coming towards me, if there was anyone I could help, if there was anything I could do, or just trying to identify, you know, like the terror that I was experiencing. So I got really used to checking in on Twitter for news. And then I also really started to understand that the cops were just tired. They just wanted to go home. They just wanted us fucking out of their way. They just wanted to go back to just beating people and it being fine. And so what you're saying about how like the national guys, like the National Guard, the DHS, all those the federal agencies coming in because the cops are tired after 50 days of thugging it out in Portland. That's exactly what it is. It's 11 o'clock for them. You know, they're like, fuck it, I don't care. And the black organizers that started to the movement here in CHOP got really frustrated because the crusty punks were the ones who were here all night. They were here after the 1 o'clock smoke bombs. They would stay all night long and make it impossible for the cops. You know, they were like, no matter how much overtime we charge the city, like we're never going to get rid of these crusty punks. Like, they don't give a fuck. We can bomb them. We could shoot at them. They think it's funny, you know, like, and because they're used to living in trees, because they're used to living on trains, because they don't give a fuck. And so those ended up being the people who held down CHOP, and the black organizers who went to all the gassings and who were there on the streets and who were motivating people and making sure that it was peaceful, went home for like 2 days after the East Precinct, they tricked itself into leaving. And they came back and they were like, and now it's a white only space. Thanks, guys. So I think what happened was the crusty punks were like, yeah, we've been helping you guys, but also we don't have anywhere to live, you know?
True.
And then I think the black organizers were like, yeah, but this is about us. Like, we have to dictate the terms of our surrender. We have to be able to dictate the terms of this encampment. And so having those two forces not be able to communicate with each other and kind of understanding a little bit about what both of them was saying at the time was really frustrating for me as somebody who lives here. Go ahead.
I detected some frustration the one day I was there. I detected a bit of frustration and conflicts. I mean, I think they were a weekend or something like that, and oh, nuts. My supervisor's going to call me any minute.
Oh my god. Okay, cool. Okay, I'm going to go see if this actually recorded, and you go do your stuff, and you check in with me later, and I'll tell you what happened, okay? This was awesome.
Okay.
You're amazing. You're good at stuff.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye.
All right.
Okay, Mari, how are you feeling today? What do you want to talk about today?
I think I'd like to discuss the broader implications. Just continue with what we discussed earlier, the broader implications of sending federal troops in unmarked cars to kidnap citizens. And I think because I see that unfolding, expanding to other cities along the West Coast and the East Coast, and eventually to the Midwest and the Southwest and the Southeast.
And you were saying that now that they're in Seattle, that we have to figure out what to do next.
Yeah, I think it's really important because they've already demonstrated a lack of disregard for what the local politicians say. But my understanding is that the mayor of Portland, Ted Wheeler, was gassed.
Yep, they gassed him yesterday.
So that, to me, I mean, you could have been clear if you'd gotten it from, you know, victims of police brutality. They have a blatant disregard for what local politicians are saying. I mean, Wheeler has asked on a number of occasions, actually told Donald Trump that we don't want your federal troops here, to get them out. And he's being blatantly ignored.
Well, this is the other thing, though, is that before this kerfuffle with these federal troops, and let's be clear, so far the troops that are named that are actually here are the DHS, right, Department of Homeland Security, and then there's also the Border Patrol. Those are the two federal entity troops that we're dealing with that we know of that they're bringing in. So, from what I understand, I mean, Jenny Durkin, our mayor in Seattle, told the cops not to tear gas us. And then they tear gassed us for 2 days straight. So before the mayor didn't have any control over the federal troops, the mayors didn't have any control over the cops.
Right. And so it was, I mean, that demonstrates a free-for-all. So of course these people go in thinking they can do whatever they want to people in the cities because they can.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no repercussions. And the thing is that, you know, I see it kind of two ways. Somebody said recently, well, look, the mayor gets threats all the time. No matter who the mayor is, whenever you're in charge, people threaten you. And the mayor realizes that the cops protect them. Whoever that mayor is, they work closely with the cops for their own personal protection, but they also know cops, and they know how easy it would be for cops to fake evidence, for cops to either let them get killed or kill them and just make some shit up. And since nobody calls cops on what they do to regular citizens, I think these mayors realize that they're uniquely vulnerable, and they when you see them kowtowing to these cop unions and chiefs of police, it's like, well, does their life depend on these cops' goodwill?
You do have to wonder. Well, you can extend it to what happens to the private citizen. I was looking up what contempt of cop means on Wikipedia, and one of the ways they decide whether or not to raise the severity level is if you failed, quote unquote, the attitude test. It's like if you don't kowtow to these people enough, they use that as a basis to arrest you. It's no stretch of the imagination to presume they can extend it to, well, we're just not going to do our jobs if you don't show enough deference to. If you're not friendly with us, we're just going to dictate our duties.
Well, and they've done it. I mean, they claim that they're doing it on a wide scale now. They're just kind of slowing down their work and their own version of work stoppage. It's interesting because all across the United States, every other part of the economy is we can't have any work stoppage. If we stop working, we die. Which is not true. That's the propaganda that the people that Bezos and anybody who owns a large corporation is going to pump out because they are missing the dollars right now. They're nervous about how they're not making money off of our labor right now. But and a strike is out of the question because then, nobody can survive without all of these services. Nobody can survive just if they can't walk into Target at any time of the day, right? And so we're discouraged from striking, but the cops themselves have been striking.
They've been striking. They've been here in Atlanta after, was it Rayshard Brooks?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The man who was shot to death in in Georgia, you know, when they heard they had to be held accountable.
Yep.
People started dropping. I saw a video footage of cops standing in line, dropping their badges on the ground.
Yep. Yep.
And then again, you know, what happened in Buffalo when they pushed that 75-year-old man down, that protester, and were forced to be held accountable for that. You know, now people are quitting in protest. So it's like, you know, oh, you're going to hold us accountable? We can't beat up people like we've been allowed to do before? Well, we're just not going to work for you.
Yeah, and you have to wonder, too, if some of the bad apples that we've been allowing to stay in the bunch aren't allowed to run rampant right now. You know, the cops are mad at us because we're calling them on murder, right? And so they know who the bad cops are. They know who the cops are that can manufacture evidence or drop guns or whatever you need. Like, they've got those going on. So I'm wondering if, like, it's getting even, it just seems like it's more lawless now than it was. The problem that I'm having is, like, okay, did you hear, okay, now I want to get this right. So I'm going to look the story up again. But I followed this closely on Twitter. There was a neighborhood, mostly people of color, who had lost some girls, right? There were two 13-year-old girls.
Minnesota, I think it was?
Yeah, I think it might have been, I wanted to say Chicago. And so they were looking through the neighborhood, and, you know, they're brown girls. They're brown teenage girls, so nobody looks for them but their people, their families, right? So this whole neighborhood got together. One of the moms of the missing girls had located her daughter's cell phone and knew that it was in a certain house in their neighborhood, just a couple blocks away. And so she called the cops. The cops did not come for hours. So she and her neighbors went into the house to investigate it. And when they went in, they found some disgusting and terrifying clear signs of child abuse.
Yes, I remember this story, but yeah, please go on.
So I saw all the videos of these neighbors on Twitter as they begged the police to look for these girls, and they begged the police to go in. So the police went into this first house. Now, when I say it's full of obvious signs of child abuse, I feel like most grown-ups know what that means, but trigger warning, I'm going to explain it for anybody who doesn't. They found children's rooms with bloody underwear, bloody sheets, but obviously children's rooms. There were toys, there were tiny beds, tiny clothing, but all of it soiled with blood and shit and just signs of bad shit happening in that house in every room, right? And they recorded this evidence. When the cops finally arrived 4 hours later or whatever, they went into the house and they came out and they said, there's nobody in here and it looks fine to us. Right? Now, there was every neighborhood, people know who owns what shit. You get to know because there are some neighbors that you have to fuck with, right? They're not doing their yard right, or they're too loud or whatever, right? So this neighborhood had figured out that this one house wasn't the only house on the street that was owned by the same entity. It was a corporation. So they went to the second house. The cops started just guarding the first house. Instead of investigating, they were guarding. And now they were mad at the neighbors for this search party. In the second house, I think that they did end up finding that girl. But the cops, there were two of them and they only found one is what I thought. The cops started beating up and arresting the neighbors. They find the girl and the cops start beating up and arresting the neighbors. And these neighbors are like, no, investigate, do your job. And the cops just get pissed, start beating people up, start yelling. And people are running all around this neighborhood now with cell phones. There's like 50 of them. And they go to the back of the second house right? And they see that the cops are guarding the back of the house, and there are people of various sizes coming out of the back of that house with bags over their head getting loaded into vans. The cops went in and said there was nobody there in the second house. It just looks like a pedophile ring that the cops were protecting at the end of the day.
Yes, and I understand that some of the cops were implicated in that. Actually, the neighborhood eventually burned the house down.
Yes!
They got the girls out. I might say there were 2 girls. They found 2 girls in there. They got them out, burned the house down.
Yep, because it was being used to abuse children. If I saw that shit, yes. If I saw obvious proof of child abuse in a house, it makes you want to burn the full fucking thing down for sure. I mean, it makes you want to find the guy who owns the place and beat him up, but it also makes you want to burn the place down. It was, I mean, and in that, like, I retweeted a lot of that story over and over again for a while because I was like, what are the cops for? If all they're doing is protecting child abusers, if all they're doing is getting angry at citizens who need them to do their jobs, what are they for?
They've got a record on more than one department to say that they're not really there to stop crime. They're there to show up after crime is committed. They're effectively high-paid janitors.
Well, or
since they demonstrate they've committed a lot of crimes on their own, particularly like sexual crimes, sexual violence, and battery against the people.
That
was
was
surprised that they're not really trying to stop this.
Yeah, child abuse. I mean, yeah, that whole fucking story, just watching all these people be like, do your job, please do your job, we're rooting for you, and to have them just turn around and just beat the fuck out of them and jail them instead was just crazy to me. And I mean, this whole era that we're living in right now where child abuse is cool is weirding me the fuck out. Like, there are some people who are like, I mean, I'm not a kid, so go ahead, I feel like, in politics.
Oh, so, but I think it speaks volumes to the priorities of people who claim that children are our greatest resource and, being pro-life and all that stuff. I think it's all very, very telling. You really start seeing the true colors of people. It's like you won't deal with the kids that are already here who are in really horrific situations.
Yeah.
But, you'd rather talk about the unborn or whatever. It's just like, come on, be serious.
Yeah. Agreed. And, I mean, abortion's interesting, too. I mean, I know that we have already talked about this, but I want to reiterate for everybody who's going to listen to this that the smoke from tear gas can cause an extra period, which is in fact an abortion. That's how you create an abortion. I've been doing a lot of research on how to abort on my own since the virus started, because as soon as coronavirus became a pandemic, abortion was considered an elective surgery that you can put off. And so there are no abortions that are being performed in the last 4 months. So we're going to see in the next 5 to 11 months a lot of extra unwanted babies coming in that nobody could figure out how to abort. We're going to see like a rush of them.
That's very troublesome. That should give people enough pause to see the broader implications of this, but I just don't think people in general have that much of a far-seeing outlook.
Yeah, they're not like.
Troublesome.
Yeah, I mean, I expect us to have like a big push of pandemic babies, but I also am trying to explain to people like some of those babies are going to be fucked up because of the tear gas their mothers, experienced, or if like there was I could not believe at the front of that mom's line, this 8-month expecting woman putting her body and her fetus on the line in Portland in the Wall of Moms. Did you see that?
I saw it.
What did you think?
Commendable, but at the same time, it's like you have to. I mean, I think you have to really take into account that there's nothing that these people will do. the police specifically. And I think it's very terrible that it has to be demonstrated that they will do these things to people, even pregnant people.
Yeah, I
sure hope that woman doesn't become a martyr.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. And also, I'm worried about her baby. If you want to get pregnant, avoid tear gas. If you don't want to get pregnant, start researching herbs. There are actually like 50 different herbs that are abortificants. And some of them are easy to get, like parsley.
Parsley is?
Mm-hmm. And actually, so is cotton. The problem is that all cotton all cotton trees are treated with pesticides, you know? So if you grow your own cotton, the cotton bark, you know, can be made into a tea that can give you an early period. And an early period is essentially an abortion. That's what you're going for when you're trying to abort a baby. So when people say early periods, what they mean is miscarriage.
I follow.
Thanks for letting me spaz out about that. So you wanted to talk about, are we out of time? Do you want to go and?
Sure, only because I have to make that call.
Oh yeah, totally. If you want to call me back and I can just edit this in and we can talk later, because I feel like we didn't cover everything you wanted to.
All right. Yeah, that'll be fine. I'll reach out to you in about, I'm going to an online meeting at 6, so I'll try and squeeze.
Whatever. If this is all we get today, then I'll have a final product for you. And if you want to give me a call later, then I'll throw that in too, okay?
Okay, sounds good.
Perfect. Cool. Okay.
Talk to you soon.
Bye. I don't know how to hang up. I'm so bad at this. Oh my god. Okay.